S&P and VIX options. Julien, Bloomberg, please.
Thank you, Youssef, for the introduction. Thank you very much, Georges, again, for setting up such an event and inviting me to Paradise again. Thank you, Bruno, for showing that you can be such a great researcher with impact both on the industry and academia, and at the same time dance on tables and be so funny. It's all of that is very inspiring. I think you were right, agreed this morning. I didn't remember when was the first time we met, but probably at SocGen when you were visiting Lorenzo's team around 2006 or 2007. And then I'm so happy that you asked me if I would be interested to join your team at Bloomberg. It was actually during this Rio conference in Angra 2011. And yeah, thank you again for this and for, I mean, it's tribute to you for setting up this great environment at Bloomberg where we can do like very interesting research in the like varied domain. Happy birthday, many happy years to you. And I think that this is actually a great talk for a conference honoring your birthday, because you will of course appear in many of the slides, because it's going to use many of your important contributions in volatility modeling. Okay, so this talk is about like the joint calibration of SPX and VIX options, which is like actually a very difficult task. I'll try to explain what are the difficulties. So VIX options, they started trading in 2006. And since then, like academics and practitioners, they have wondered if it was possible to build a model on the S&P that would calibrate jointly to S&P options, VIX futures, and VIX options. And actually, so Jim Gavron in 2008 was one of the first to tackle this issue and show that a diffusive model, actually it was quite complicated, was able to approximately match both markets, but not exactly. Okay? And later, others have argued that you needed jumps to do the job. So in this talk, I want to revisit this problem. And the main question I want to address is, does there exist a continuous model on the S&P, so no jumps on the S&P? I have nothing against jumps, but I want to see if they are needed or not. That jointly calibrates to S&P options, VIX futures, and VIX options. If so, how we build such a model? If not, why? Okay, a very first quick slides on necessary condition for this program to be accomplished is that the price of the payoff VIX squared that we get from the market, actually we have two ways to get it from the market, either from the VIX market, VIX options, or from the S&P market. And those two numbers should match, of course, because if you have a model that calibrates both to S&P options and on the VIX futures and VIX options, they will give you like prices for the VIX squared from the two markets, and they have to be the same because the model is consistent. It will not like give two different prices. So from VIX options, you know how you do. You just like replicate the VIX squared, so which is a parabola in the VIX using like VIX futures, VIX calls, and VIX puts. From the S&P options, but remember that by definition of the VIX squared, the price of the VIX squared today at time 0, so the VIX squared maturing at some later date cap t, is just the price of a calendar spread on S&P lock contracts, maturities t and t plus 30 days. So now each lock contract, you can replicate it using out-the-money calls and puts on the S&P. Okay. With the weight 1 over k squared. So here it's just a weight 2 because it's the parabola. When you differentiate twice, the weight is just 2. Okay, so you can say, but then you see, you just look at the market, and maybe if those numbers are just inconsistent, but you just stop here because you know that you can't do the job. Well, actually, it's not really a problem because you see that here, those numbers, you get it by summing the prices of out-the-money options, and so it depends on the extrapolation of your smile. And actually, it's not a problem to make sure that the two numbers, so the one from the VIX market and the one from the S&P market, are the same, because you can always make the price of a lock contract and the S&P as large as you want. Remember that we sum, for instance, out-the-money put options for very small strikes. If you make sure that your extrapolation of the prices of put options on the S&P is actually linear here for very, very small strikes, that means that this integral in the replication formula will be infinite, and so you can raise the price of the VIX squared as large as you want. And for the price of the VIX squared from the VIX market, it can also be made arbitrarily large because now we have weight 2, so that's the units of the out-the-money call options on the VIX that you need to use to replicate the VIX squared. And you see that here, it's if you make sure that your extrapolation of the prices of the VIX call options for very large strikes is non-integrable, well then this part in the replication formula is infinite, and you can also raise the price of the VIX squared from the VIX market as large as you want. So you have a lot of room to make sure that the two numbers are the same. For the, you can also compute lower bounds. So for instance, for the lower bounds on VIX squared, given the VIX finite number of VIX implied vol, it just corresponds to the sub-replication of the parabola by a piecewise affine function. And when you actually assume that you have already a full interpolation of the VIX call prices, then the lower bound is given by the the extrapolation that gives you the smaller price, and then when you reach 0, so that's the price of the VIX call as a function of the strike. Okay, so now I do this job. I actually modify slightly the extrapolation of the S&P SMILE so that the two numbers are the same, and I can carry on. Okay, so I mentioned this work by Jim in 2008. So looking at this double mean reverting CV model, if you want, and these are the numerical results it's presenting. So this is, of course, the VIX SMILE, because you see that it's upward sloping. You have positive skew on VIX options. So, of course, the model is the orange line, and the dots are the market, so bid and asks. And okay, the fit looks decent. And then that's for the S&P at the same time in the same model. Okay, you see the negative skew. And the fit looks decent as well. But actually, when you zoom a little bit, especially on the short maturities, you see that actually the implied vol of VIX options in the model is a bit too high. You see even here at the Monet, it's like maybe should be 70%, and here it's like, I don't know, 77. And it's a bit too high. And for the same maturities, or the same, short maturities for the S&P, you see that you don't have enough skew in absolute value on the S&P. Okay, so you would like, so somehow you would like the orange skew to be a bit more steep. So you know that in stochastic volatility model, the Adomone skew is really the product of spot vol correlation and vol of vol. Okay, spot vol correlation, basically you can't put it below -1, so you put it to the maximum, and then that means that vol of vol has to be large. But okay, so here you would like vol of vol to be larger, so that the slope is in absolute value larger. But if you increase the vol of vol, you will actually increase the implied vol of VIX options, which you don't want because it's already too high. So you already see the conflict here when you try to fit both markets. Okay, I will skip all this in the interest of time, but many people have tried models with jumps on the S&P. You see quite complicated models. Actually, you don't have to look, but it's pretty complicated models with results that for them are quite good, some not so precise, but all involving jumps on the S&P. This work is still inconclusive. So some people have tried without jumps on the S&P. So the first work is a bit inconclusive because there were problems with the market data, so I'm not commenting. But this one, I think, is the closest to what I was looking for, and it's by Jean-Pierre and Yuri. So they are looking at a Heston model with stochastic vol of vol. Okay, so the vol of vol is itself a stochastic process. Okay. That's positively correlated to vol, so it can generate the positive VIX skew. No jumps on the S&P, and you need good fit to both SPX and VIX options, but unfortunately only for maturities 4 months and beyond, just because of the techniques they are using. And it's a bit unfortunate because precisely, as we have seen, it's precisely for short maturities that it's hard to calibrate to both at the same time. So it's still not completely an answer to our question. Okay, so does there exist a continuous model on the S&P that jointly calibrates S&P option, VIX futures, VIX option? No answer yet. Okay, let's look. I mean, how I would tackle this issue with continuous model on the S&P. So I'm just only considering those continuous models on the S&P. Sigma T can have jump. Okay, it can be rough, it can be path dependent, it can be awful. Okay, but no jumps on the S&P. And we know that. So this is our stochastic volatility model. And corresponding to this stochastic volatility model, we have corresponding local volatility function that I denote by sigma loc, just by this projection here. And that's the corresponding local volatility model. And we know from the works of Junge that for all the marginal distributions of the initial model and the corresponding local volatility model, they agree. And using Bruno's formula, we conclude that this model, okay, is calibrated to the market smile of the S&P if and only if this corresponding local volatility, sigma log, that just depends on the initial model, is equal to the, what I denote by sigma LV, which is Bruno's local volatility, so the one that you compute using prices of call options in the markets. And the corresponding market local volatility model will be denoted by the same LV here. So let's move to the VIX. Because I'm only considering models that are continuous on the S&P, we know that the 30-day log contract on the S&P has an implied volatility that's exactly the same as the implied volatility of the variance swap. Okay? And so that means that I can write the VIX squared as the conditional expectation of the 30-day average of the instantaneous variance. Tau denotes just 30 days. In the case of the corresponding local volatility model or the market local volatility model, this given all the information up to time t, because we have here Markov models, it's just given the spot at time cap t. And so we have, in the model, the price of a VIX future is going to be exactly this one, the expectation of the square root of the VIX squared, and the VIX squared is this. And we have also here the formula for the VIX call. So we observe market prices for the futures and the calls on the VIX at a few listed maturities TI, okay, typically up to 6 or 7 months. And we want to find a model, so this is continuous on the S&P, so this is calibrated to the S&P smile, and such that we can recover the prices of VIX futures and VIX options. So you see that we want to be calibrated to the marginal distribution of the underlying, and also somehow to the some marginal distributions of the volatility of the underlying. Okay. So it's actually quite, I mean, we're demanding quite a lot. And so it's a complicated problem. So just to simplify it, let's look at the case of instantaneous VIX. So I'm just replacing 30 days by 200 microseconds, like in Martinos talk. Okay, and so then it's just instantaneous volatility. Okay, so very quick reminder, probably not needed here, but like the distributions of two random variables x and y are said to be in convex order if and only if for any convex function f, the price of f of x, if you want, is smaller than the price of f of y. Okay, so that means that both distributions have the same mean, but y is more spread, okay, than x as a distribution. And in financial terms, so that means that x and y have the same forward value, but the calls or puts on y are more expensive than the call or put on x. So let's assume that we have a model, continuous on the S&P, that's calibrated to the S&P smile. Okay, so we have this equality here. So as already observed by the birthday boy in 2005, according to conditional Jensen's, this means that local volatility squared is smaller, because it's an average, okay, is smaller in convex order than the instantaneous variance. Okay, so local variance is smaller in convex order than instantaneous variance. So that's a necessary condition. Now, conversely, is it a sufficient condition for the existence of a model that's calibrated to the market smile? So if we assume that the local variance is smaller in convex order than the instantaneous variance, can we build a joint distribution for S and sigma such that the calibration condition that's here is satisfied? And the answer is actually yes. It depends. It uses Strassen theorem. So x is my local variance. Y is the instantaneous variance. I'm assuming that x is smaller than y in the convex order. So we know from Strassen's theorem that there exists a joint distribution of x and y such that that's a martingale transport. Okay, so that's the expectation of y given x is x. And now you can simply define pi, so the joint distribution of S and sigma, by taking the risk-neutral distribution for the asset price. And given the asset price, you compute the local variance, and then you define the distribution of sigma t squared as this martingale transport law, and then it's very easy by construction to see that you have the calibration condition that is satisfied. Okay, so a necessary and sufficient condition for a jointly calibrating model on the S&P to exist is this condition here on convex order of local variance and instantaneous variance at each date t. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that if you assume that you have access to the prices of instantaneous VIX, you have the distribution of this one on the right-hand side. You also have the distribution of this one because it's the local volatility. Okay, you use the Duper formula, you compute it, you know the risk neutral distribution, so you know the distribution of this one, and you should just check that they are in convex order. Note in particular that here this general construction does not address the dynamics of sigma. So at two different dates, t and t prime, the sigmas could be completely different. So it could lead to processes of instantaneous volatility that do not make sense. And so you could add conditions on the process sigma. But what's mostly interesting is that you already see in this limiting case, that's not the true case, that it might be impossible to build a continuous model that jointly calibrates to S&P and VIX options if this is not satisfied. Okay. So in particular, it's quite interesting here to see that how would you do in practice? You would actually solve a series of martingale transport problems because you would be given the law of the local variance, okay, so this we know, and the law of the instantaneous variance because that's from the VIX options, and you know that you want to solve like this martingale transport problem. So Jan has talked about it this morning and is part of like many authors that are here. So solutions to these martingale transport problems, they include like the left and right curtains by Begelbock and Juillet and Henri Labordère, the forward starting solution of the Scorogon embedding problems that Bruno has suggested, local variance gamma model by Carr and Natoichi, and so on. So the funny thing here is that usually the martingale transport in finance is like the martingality constraint is about one asset at two different dates, and here it's actually two types of instantaneous variance at one single date. So it's just another type of martingale transport problem. That doesn't have to be optimal, by the way. We just need one martingale. We can add some optimality condition to find like solutions. Okay, but this is what the case of just the instantaneous VIX, and we have to look at the real case of the 30-day VIX. Okay, and what happens when you look at the real VIX? So first you average over 30 days. Okay, and also you look at the fair price. Okay, so the fair strike of a variance swap. So that means you take the conditional expectation at time f cap t. Okay, so let's look at market data. Okay, of course I should. Okay, so this is the VIX squared in the local volatility model. Okay, and so I can completely compute the distribution of this one, this random variable, and I also have the distribution of the VIX squared from the VIX market from VIX futures and VIX option prices. Okay, so I can just compare the distribution of those two. We know that if we were in the instantaneous case, and if the model were calibrated to the S&P, this one should be smaller in convex order than this one. Let's see how it works in the market. So this for the first VIX future maturity 21 days, the data is from August 2018. So that's the VIX smile, okay, for this maturity with the VIX future indicated by the dashed line. Okay. And these are the two VIX squared distribution. In blue, so that's going to be the color code for the rest. Blue is going to be the local volatility model, and red will be from the VIX market. Okay? And you expected somehow that the blue distribution should be smaller in convex order than the red, and it looks like it's the opposite. Okay? And how do you check that it's the opposite? You just compute all the call prices for those two distributions, and you should check that the blue curve is always above the red curve, and that's what you see here. Even if you go to very large strike, that would remain. Okay, so indeed, the VIX squared in the local vol model for this first maturity here is larger in convex order than the VIX squared from the VIX option market. And this is the corresponding VIX smiles. Okay, so that's the VIX smile from the market, and that's the VIX smile in the local volatility model, much larger. You may ask, why is it that I have like this spike here in the distribution of the VIX squared in the local volatility model, and then it goes down very quick? Well, it's just because the VIX squared as a function of the SNP at time cap t looks something like this. It's a bit like a local variance. And so actually the distribution of the Vic squared is just the image of the risk-neutral distribution of the SNP by this function. And you see that it has a minimum here that's in the bulk of the distribution of the risk-neutral distribution of the SNP. And that's why you have like so much probability here and then decreases. Okay. Now let's look at the third Vic future maturity for that date, 77 days. Okay, so 2 months and a half. And that this is the market smile of the VIX. And the two distributions now, but it's not as clear as before, so it's not completely clear if one is smaller than the other in convex order. Actually, we can check that they are not when we look at the call prices. There are some strikes for which the blue is above the red, but for other strikes, it's the converse. So the two distributions are not rankable in convex order. And this is the corresponding smile. Now, if I play the video for the first 4 maturities, so that would be for 21 days, 49 days, still 77 days, and 112 days. So you see that if you would go further, then you would see the blue going below the red. Okay, and so that's the corresponding movie for the VIX smile. Okay. So what's the conclusion here is that for short maturity, actually the distribution of the VIX squared from the market is smaller in convex order than the distribution of the local volatility VIX squared. After the two distributions are not rankable, and then after it goes back to the case of instantaneous VIX. Okay, and so now if you remember precisely the case of instantaneous VIX, you may be tempted to believe that there exists a model continuous on the S&P that's calibrated to the S&P smile and all VIX options, if and only if, for all maturity Ti, you would have that the local VIX square would be smaller in convex order than the VIX square from the market, and then conclude that such a model does not exist. But actually, the fact that for each time t, you have the convex ordering of local variance and instantaneous variance does not imply that the same holds for the 30-day VIX, because summing over 30 days and averaging over and conditioning on FT may undo convex ordering. So here I have a few slides showing that convex order is not preserved under the sum. Okay? You can look at them if you want, but it's not what is instrumental here. What's most instrumental here is that the fact that when you condition on the information available up to time cap t, that may invert the convex order. Why so? Imagine the case of a fast mean reversion in volatility, okay, which Jean-Pierre and many other people know very well here. In that case, sigma t will, so small t is between cap t and cap t plus 30 days, okay? And if you have like very fast mean reversion with a time scale that's smaller than 30 days, then sigma t will quickly forget about the information contained in f cap t, and that means that actually this random variable will be very close to just a constant, okay? So in Dirac mass in terms of distribution, so as small as possible in terms of convex order, okay? Now if you look at the case of the local VIX squared, what happens here, the local VIX squared, you see that the instantaneous volatility is a function of S log, which is a martingale, okay? So it does not mean revert, okay? So you might, okay, the distribution of this one might indeed be larger in convex order than the distribution of this one because of this lack of mean reversion here. One issue, sorry, is that if here you have a fast mean reverting volatility, we know by the work of Jean-Pierre and Papanicolaou, Sircar, and others, that the local volatility, the smile will going to be almost flat, and the local volatility as well. So in the limit, of course, the local volatility is flat, and that's also a Dirac mass. So that you don't want. But it's about how small is small. Okay, so it's comparing two things. So that's what we will see. Rough volatility models are also good candidates for this, especially with a Hurst exponent that's small enough, and that typically correspond to the values that are estimated by the authors in rough vol models. Okay. So we know that we need to be able to calibrate to both S&P and VIX options. We need this inequality here. So we need that for short maturities, we need to have this inversion of convex ordering. Okay? So despite the fact that this one is smaller in convex order than this one, when we average and take the conditional expectation, then the order should reverse. So one natural way to achieve it is forget about the averaging about 30 days. You just look at for each time u, at least for many times u between t and t plus 30 days, you will try to get this. Okay? And then you hope that when you sum over 30 days, you will keep this inversion of convex ordering. Okay? So how can we reach that? Let me take simple models and show you that you can indeed reach that in one-factor log normal forward instantaneous variance models. Okay. Because you see that here what we want is something that's involving forward instantaneous variances. Okay, that's a forward instantaneous variance. U is between t and t plus 30 days. Okay. And so I denoted by psi cap t u. Okay, and it's well known since the seminal work of Bruno and then followed by Bergomi, Bühler, that those forward instantaneous variances that are traded and positive, so they are driftless and positive. That's the only thing you need in order to model them. And I will just look at simple models where those psi used, they are just log normal. Okay, so K is a deterministic kernel. Z is a Brownian motion that's correlated with the Brownian motion that drives the spot. Okay, and so the instantaneous variance is just the square root of psi small t, which is just the instantaneous variance. Okay, so now, okay, so these are the sure formulas. I'm just looking at the time homogeneous kernel for simplicity. Okay, can we choose a kernel K such that we have this inversion of convex ordering, at least for many U's, and for cap T small enough? Okay, the first ingredient is that here we want this, okay, this distribution to be small in convex order, so that means that the knowledge of f cap T, all the information in the market up to time cap T, should give little information on the instantaneous variance at time u between t and t plus 30 days. So at least for many u's between t and t plus 30 days. Of course, not too close to cap t. On the other side, this, okay, should not be as, this distribution here should not be as small as this one. So in particular, that means that sigma log should not be a constant, because if it's a constant, then it's a Dirac mass, and that's as small as possible. And so what is the sigma log? Remember, it's the conditional expectation of sigma u squared, but not given f cap t, given just the spot at time u. Okay? So somehow, the spot at time u should give enough information so that the right-hand side here is larger in convex order than the left-hand side. So SU should give more information than f cap t on sigma u squared. So a graph is probably the best to understand that. So where this is the VIX maturity, this is u between t and t plus 30 days, that may be here. In the first case, we know everything up to time cap t, okay, spot and vol path, and we want to estimate the vol at date u. In the second case, well, of course, we know the initial value at time 0, but apart from that, the only thing I know is the spot value at date u. So it's just 1 point. But it's 1 point at the same date as the date at which I want to estimate the vol. Okay, so that's a big advantage compared to those paths. So here's a lot of data, but only up to time cap t. Here is just one data, but at the right date u. Okay? And that makes a big difference. And so in order to make sure that f cap t has small, so the first ingredient, that f cap t has small impact in sigma u squared, you remember the formula here. So that means that all the dzs before cap t, they should be multiplied by something that's very close to 0, so that it has like very, ft has very small impact on sigma u squared. And for the second ingredient, which is that the information of su should give enough information on sigma u squared, we need k of u minus s to be large for at least some values of s between 0 and u, because, for instance, if you know that s at time u is a bit below s0, so that means that globally you drew dws that were, say, negative. So because of the negative correlation with the vol, that means that you drew the dz that were mostly positive, and so that can pass to sigma u squared only if those dz that were positive are multiplied by something that's big enough. Okay? And so the two ingredients, you have only one solution, is that the k of theta is like this u minus s, has to be so very small for many value of theta, between u minus c and u, and very large for small values of theta, and that's exactly a fast decreasing kernel. Okay, so that's very reminiscent of fast mean reversion, and the fact that you need a large enough k for some value implies that you need also a very high volatility of volatility. fast decreasing kernel can also be reached by rough vol models with a h that's small enough, because the smaller the h, the more decreasing the kernel. Okay. So those are two good candidates. So you see that if you are like fast mean reversion, somehow the fact that you know this gives you very, very little information of the vol, but the information of SU will give you more information on sigma u squared. And one important point that's completely in line with market data, and that's beautiful, is what I said here. So imagine that T is very small. Actually, the information of just SU, so if you have a SU that's quite, again, what I said, that's smaller than S0, means your DW were negative, your DZ were positive. Okay, your DZ were positive globally on average between 0 and U, and so it doesn't necessarily tell much about the one that were just here, but the smaller the T, the more information it gives you on the DZ that are here, and so the inversion of convex ordering will precisely will happen for small maturities and not for larger, which is exactly what we observe in the market, so that's quite interesting. So I will finish with like a few numerical experiments on one of the simplest kernel that was actually suggested by Bruno back in 1993, the APSV paper, also known as the one-factor Bergomi model, because somehow it's it's when you want to simplify the Bergomi model, which is two-factor, that's the one that you get. So it's simply exponential kernel, and so inversion of convex ordering, you know, fast decreasing, so that means that k has to be large. K is the mean reversion, and omega has also to be large. That's the vol of vol. And for a power law kernel, so that's the rough volatility models, we want fast decreasing kernels, and so h has to be small. So let me show you to finish like this numerical experiment on those models to show you that you can reproduce the inversion of convex ordering for those models. So here it's the exponential kernel model with a large mean reversion of 30. Okay, so it's 1/30 years, which is like maybe 2 weeks characteristic time of mean reversion, so smaller than the 30 days of the VIX, and large vol of vol 7.5, but the omega squared over k is not that big. But the results are completely similar with the rough Bergomi model with a small h. So let's look at here second maturity, like it's so let's say a month and a half for the VIX options and futures. So I will show you graphs where you have call prices of different quantities. So here it's just the instantaneous variance, okay? And for the instantaneous variance, you see that indeed, so again, the blue is the local volatility, the corresponding local volatility of the Bergomi model, okay? And we know that's just the Jensen, that's smaller in convex order than the stochastic volatility model itself. When I just sum without taking the conditional expectation, it's still below. When I take just the conditional expectation but not summing, I have a strong inversion of convex ordering, and that's because of the very strong mean reversion that I get. And now you want to put everything together, so sum plus conditioning, and you cross your fingers and you hope that the red stays below the blue, and that's what happens, okay? So you are able to reproduce the inversion of convex ordering. So that's what we observe in the market, that the price of call options on the VIX is larger in the local equivalent local volatility model than in the stochastic volatility model, and that's the corresponding VIX. When you look at further maturities, it's kind of the same, but now it's less and less clear because of what I understand, and again, it's completely in line with the market observation. I will stop in 30 seconds, just saying that there are other ways to get an analysis of this by doing like small vol of vol asymptotics, and actually directly use approximate formulas of the S&P skew and the VIX future, for instance, in a 1 or 2 factor or skewed 2 factor Bergomi model, to prove that in this model, like joint calibration requires large K and large omega, and this we can be more precise because we can see actually that omega has to be large as K. So it's not, so that means that, for instance, in the ergodic limit of Jean-Pierre and co-authors, the omega squared over K would actually go to the roof. Okay, so that's interesting situations where you would have infinite variance in the limiting regime. I will skip all this, justifying the 2-factor Bergomi model, and just mixing like 2 exponentials in the rough Bergomi model as Bergomi did for its own version of the 2-factor exponential model you can actually exactly calibrate to VIX options. So that's one thing. So you're completely done design on the VIX options, but then you don't have enough skew on the S&P here. So here it's not. So it's still a work in progress. What I'm doing now is actually looking at the other way around. First, calibrating to the S&P options using the leverage function that Joseph talked about this morning. So this condition here. And then you want to work, so that's true for any stochastic volatility model AT. And then you want to optimize on the AT, okay, so that the prices of options on the VIX corresponds to the one in the market. And that's where I'm using least squares Monte Carlo and neural nets to estimate here. Because now the VIX squared is hard to estimate because it's a function of the spot and the two factors driving the stochastic volatility at that time. So that's also very related to the talk by Florian yesterday, because that's exactly the same kind of situation. We want a non-stochastic function of non-linear function of this one that corresponds to the square root for the VIX future and the square root minus k plus for the call. Okay, I'll keep all this. You can, in the end of that, you could say, okay, is there an arbitrage or not? Yeah, sorry? Yeah, and it's still hard to gauge. That was the conclusion page. Thank you very much for your attention.